Every week we do a Q&A with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community to find how they persevered, how they innovated, how they built communities, and how they found solutions. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast. Welcome to the Chris Weidel Nametags Chat Podcast. Today we're with Sam Grewe, who is a three-time world champion, silver medalist in the high jump in Rio, has the world record of 1.9 meters. For those of you who don't do meters, that is almost 6'3". Sam is also just finishing his first week of med school. Then he will go to Tokyo. Sam, thank you for fitting us into your crazy schedule.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is amazing. What is it like to start med school and know that you're going to leave really soon after you start to go to Tokyo to fly, 13-hour time difference. So I don't even know how long it's going to take you to fly there. You're going to land, you're going to jump, and you're going to come back. Like, how are you wrapping your mind around this?
Honestly, the timing of it all is just, it's terrible. To come into med school, it's already such a learning curve trying to settle into an appropriate schedule, figure out how I'm going to learn here, what studying looks like, and just kind of adapting to the sheer amount of material that's being dumped on us. And so, I'm trying to manage all that while training every day, in the back of my mind, knowing, okay, I'm leaving for a week and a half here in just 14 days. And so it's definitely going to be extremely challenging doing my work from abroad, trying to keep up with my peers. That being said, everyone here at Michigan Medical School has already been so accommodating for anything that I'm going to need when I'm gone. They have already, expressed how excited they are for me, and all my deferrals are going through. They're very happy to provide opportunities for me to push back certain assignments and such. So it's all going to be okay. I'm just very much looking forward to this busy time of my life kind of being behind me.
Okay. I mean, there's so much to unpack in that. First, if you push back assignments, I mean, it's not like you push back. I mean, it's this keeps going. There's a momentum to it, and you push it back, and that means you have a little bit less time, but you're doing it. How are you prepared for Tokyo? How are you feeling? How are you jumping? You had a sprained ankle earlier this year.
Yeah. So as far as Tokyo goes, I am feeling extremely, prepared to jump there to the best of my ability. I jumped for Notre Dame's track and field team for the past 3 years and just got, top of the line training there, and came a long way. I think, my average height just went up, considerably every year. And also, you mentioned the injuries. Yeah, I had 2 ankle injuries over the course of the past 5 months probably. And those were really, really upsetting for me because I didn't know how those would go. But I thankfully those healed extremely well. Trained with my coach at home, Kyle Mishler, all through the summer. And now that I'm actually at the University of Michigan, I am recording all my workouts, and Kyle has given me live updates and live notes. So I feel very well prepared. I feel like all my coaching is there. My jumps are really, really consistent, and really looking forward to being in that competitive environment where you have the adrenaline going, because you just you can't parallel that in practice. And so the best jumps undoubtedly come at the big competitions.
But it sounds like you've also jumped higher in practice than you have for the world record. Is that right?
So not necessarily in practice. So the world record that I hold of 1.9 meters is actually not a PR of mine. And that's just because I have jumped higher than that at certain meets that weren't WPA approved, meaning the results from those competitions wouldn't count towards Paralympic records. And so that's actually very exciting for me because it kind of opens the door for me to, possibly break the world record at Tokyo, knowing that I've already jumped a world record, on multiple occasions. And so, I definitely think it's the possibilities there in Tokyo, and I think that'd be just a really cool place to do it.
And you're super consistent too. I mean, that's one of your greatest attributes, isn't it? That you're not one of these guys who fluctuates up and down. Like, your height. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that I am probably most proud of in the past 5 years since Rio is that the highest heights that I've jumped have only gone up so marginally, 3, 4, 5 centimeters. But I'm consistently jumping far higher than I was consistently jumping back then. Meaning, a bad day of jumps now would have been just an okay day of jumps back in 2016. And so that's what I'm really most proud of going into Tokyo, knowing that, even a bad day, I think puts me in a really good spot for medal contention. So if I can put it all together and have a good day, I think it'll all be really good.
Yeah, you have a great floor, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
hope at
exactly.
a big event to be
Mhm.
able to push that ceiling considerably. Let's get a little bit of perspective. So the world record is about 6'3", and your average door is 6'8", right? So people are kind of looking at their door like that's it's a bit daunting, right? Because when you are out there with just the bar, it kind of looks like, oh, okay, well, this guy and that person jumped over it, so it kind of makes sense. But when I look at my door in my office, I'm like, that looks really high. Do you look at those things? Do you go down the street and see some guy who's like 6'3", and you're like, I think I could jump over you?
So I don't necessarily usually do that. I have done it, especially when I meet guys who are like, 6'4", and I tell them my PR and they're so blown away that I could jump over them. Then I kind of start to think that's really cool. But on the track, I try not to think about that because it is easy to kind of get caught up in the heights of the bar that I'm jumping over. As soon as the bar is my height or higher, it can get really scary because you're having to get your entire body over effectively your entire body. And so I try to just, have a good jump out there and not consider how high the bar is. But it is definitely cool to see comparisons like that. Especially I've never seen it compared to a door, but that does kind of put it in a really cool perspective to think like, yeah, I can jump over the door. That'd be cool. So yeah, absolutely.
That would freak people out if you did
Yeah,
that.
probably
What
hurt me a little bit too.
it might, yeah, the landing might not be quite as good as landing in your pit, in your high jump pit. What goes into a jump when you're looking? So you said you're not trying to gain that perspective. You're just trying to, I mean, basically put it into abstract in some ways, right? The bar of like, okay, this is what I have to do. I have to get over the bar. What are the elements? How do you approach it?
Yeah. So as far as high jump goes, one of the things that I think people who don't high jump don't really recognize is that everything, 99% of what you do in high jump happens in the 10 steps leading up to the bar. The approach is everything, building up the momentum and running a tight curve and putting your foot out there and staying behind it, shoulders perpendicular to the bar. That all happens before you even jump. And then once you're actually in the air, you've pretty much either set yourself up to clear the bar or not. There's certain very, very small timing things that happen in the air, milliseconds. But I mean, me and I think most high jumpers that I talk to agree that once you're off the ground, you almost black out a little bit. You just kind of wake up on the pit, look up, hope the bar is still there. And so when I'm thinking about what my jump is going to look like, I only really imagine those 10 steps. I only imagine my approach and the cues that are going through my head while I'm jumping only apply to the time that I'm spending on the ground. Whether that's building momentum, running the curve, things that I mentioned. No, there's not enough time to get in the air and think about doing something different with your body. And so that's one of the kind of frustrating things about high jump is that so much of it is just independent from actually jumping. And so someone like me who's been high jumping for 7 years now, that's kind of a good skill set to have, is that my approach is super consistent now. Because if you're in your first, second, third year of high jump, it's probably not going to be as consistent, and your jumps are thus going to be so much less consistent. And so, yeah, it's definitely interesting.
With the curve, do you imagine that curve? Do you know? Because I mean, I imagine you want to have the same exact curve that is bringing you to the bar, and that's something that could be relatively easy to make a mistake, right? How do you ensure the consistency on that one?
Totally. For me, and I think for many other high jumpers, the curve is just the hardest part to perfect. For me and a lot of other Paralympic athletes, one of the things that makes the curve so hard is we are using prosthetics, or some of the guys I jump against are hopping. And so it's harder to get consistency with a prosthetic or when you're hopping as opposed to just running the curve. And Yeah, I mean, when I was first starting off to run approaches, my coach would put duct tape down where each step should be along the curve so that I am just getting that muscle memory down. Now, not so much. I know what it's supposed to feel like, but there's also just so many elements that go into the curve besides just, where your feet are. So that's something that I'm working on right now. Just before recording this podcast, I came from practice and my coach and I were talking about the curve almost the entire time. How can we run this curve in the best way to set myself up with all the right angles and all the right pressures to have a good jump. And so it's definitely super important.
Yeah, because when you get into a big stadium, I mean, this is sometimes the challenge, right? Where you're not jumping in a big stadium, then you're jumping in a big stadium and then shrinking your world down to go, no, this is, and none of that other stuff matters. It's just right here. And this is the work that you're doing. And it sounds so interesting too, because people are like, what are you talking about? Like, no, it's the jump part. It's not that other stuff.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right about how different it is to be in a stadium. And one of the things that I think most high jumpers would agree on is that when you're in, a big stadium where there's in a big competition where there's all this adrenaline going and you're so psyched up, so much of my like my marks for my horizontal and vertical for where I actually put the tape to start from, those change entirely because I take so much stronger step that I have to scoot back usually, 3 feet at least to actually jump there. And so in some ways, all the consistencies that I've worked on kind of go out the window, but I'm at this point, I know how to adapt that to remain consistent a lot, like to go with the bigger steps that I'm taking. And it is just such a different environment because it's not high stakes in practice, but as well as I do, when you're in the games, that's what you've worked for the last 4 years, or for you, and you were every 2 years with the summer and winter games, but it's just so much higher stakes and every step seems like it carries so much more weight.
Right. And that adrenaline, well, great and helpful, hopefully you've got to channel it, but that's also part of your whole high jump thing, isn't it? I mean, it's like you're having your in run and then your jump is basically like resisting your in run, right? Resisting your in run with that lift from what's your prosthetic leg, right? You jump off of your good leg and lift your hips and your leg with your good leg, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I don't jump off my blade. Most long jumpers go off their blade at this point in time, but I've never seen someone high jump off their blade just because it's so hard to take it vertical. So most of the mechanics of my high jump are the same as a two-legged high jumper would employ.
What about when you're in the air? It looks like there's almost more of a bend from your hips than we're used to seeing with like the Olympic, where it's almost like sort of a 3-part over the bar for them. It looks like it's more of a 2-part for you. Is that right? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I'm impressed you picked up on that. That's kind of one of the things that my coach and I have struggled with is, we can get so close to mimicking the mechanics of an able-bodied high jumper, but the prosthetic, there are just certain things that it can't mirror. One of those things is the penultimate. If you're going to lower your body just so slightly to actually jump with the blade, you have to take a huge leap into that penultimate, the second to last step, as well as at takeoff. Just the sheer length of my prosthetic prevents me from throwing my leg really tightly up and across my body. So it swings around. It kind of circumvents around my body, which still allows me to get the rotations that I need, the inversion that I need over the bar, but it is different. And that's one of the things that, usually if I knock a bar over, it's because my prosthetic kind of pulled the bar off with me. And so that's something that I struggle with. It's a lot of it can be prevented, I guess, just from throwing your leg extra hard at takeoff and kind of providing that extra explosion as well as just getting the leg out of the way. But yeah, it is different in that sense from the mechanics that someone else would use.
Right. And then when you get over the bar, it's like your hips drop and then the legs come all the way up, right?
Yep. So that's a lot of core as far as just tucking your chin, bringing your legs up, and the prosthetic sometimes does lag behind and pull the bar off. And so that's something you just got to work on.
That's just got to be the frustrating part, but it's part of the game too, right?
Oh, very much so. And that's especially what makes it frustrating is the fact that so often I will, jump, land on the pit and just feel like it was such a good jump, that there's no way that bar's coming down. because I didn't even feel my prosthetic hit it. It's like, if it hits on the part of my leg that I don't really have any biological flesh there, I have no idea that it hit. And so it's just frustrating to learn that the bar came down that way instead of just feeling it.
It is just, I mean, it's part of the game though. And it's part of the game that you're playing, which is the same. It's the high jump is the same, but it's a little bit, in some ways, it's a little bit more interesting game just because you have more elements that you have to incorporate. Can you describe so T6 or F63, right, is your class? What is F63 and how do you fit into that class?
Yeah. So F63 is a newer classification that was previously identified as F4T42. And basically the F63/F42 classification consists of those who are single above knee amputees. And so, I fit into that as a single sort of above knee amputee, as I'm sure we'll talk about. But it also consists of a lot of guys who still have their whole biological leg, but have some sort of, debilitating muscular disease that starts from slightly above the knee and goes down. Or, a couple of guys have, I don't even know what the title is, but they still have their leg. It's just, you can tell from their knee down, the bones, the muscles didn't form right. Their feet are kind of, crooked. And so it's a simple classification, single above knee amputee, but there are certain nuanced disability types that fit into that category as well, which includes
right. And so you lost your leg to cancer when you were a kid. We'll go back and talk about that in a second. But the surgery that you had was rotationplasty, which is not super common, right?
No, not at all. And it was even more uncommon when I had the surgery done.
Which was now like 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Is that what it is?
Yeah, wow. 9 years, I guess. That's crazy. 2012, I think is what it was.
Wow. Okay. So how does this work? Because I read about it and I think I know what I'm talking about, but I guess that you know what you're talking about much more so than I do.
Yeah, it is a wild procedure. And actually, when I first heard about it from the orthopedic surgeon who gave me the option to pursue rotationplasty, I said, there is no chance I'm going through with that. That is crazy. But basically what rotationplasty includes is removing, it's basically cutting above the knee, cutting below the knee, and removing the portion in between. So your knee and slightly above and slightly below, but leaving the blood vessels and the nerves intact. From there, you've got basically your shin bone and your foot connected to your upper leg via blood vessels and nerves. So you take that lower portion, the shin and the foot, rotate it 180 degrees, reattach that to your femur, to your upper leg, so that essentially your ankle and your foot line up with your other knee, such that your foot is actually facing backwards. So now, my ankle operates as my knee, and I have my foot and toes pointing down and backwards, kind of operating as a stump would be that goes down into my prosthetic. And so basically what rotationplasty provides is it kind of preserves that additional joint. So when I'm walking, I can use my ankle sort of as a knee, whereas classic above knee amputees would have to kind of just flick the prosthetic forward because they don't have a biological joint right there. It's really confusing, especially without a graphic, and it's definitely worth Googling. There's a really great Mayo Clinic, short video that describes it. But yeah, I mean, it's wild.
So is your ankle that becomes your knee, is that innervated, or it's just sort of skeletally oriented so that you can use your knee?
Fully innervated. So no nerves were cut. And so after surgery for, the first 2 or 3 months, it still felt like I had my full leg. And there are still times occasionally where my right knee will itch. I don't have a right knee anymore. And so basically what they did with the extra, length of nerves was kind of tuck them in. And so, I can just scratch the back of my leg, and sometimes it'll satisfy the itch of my knee. So fully innervated. It took some time, the brain plasticity for my brain to really recognize and acknowledge that the foot was now facing backwards, that it was operating as a knee. But now, 9 years later, it doesn't feel like a foot at all. It doesn't even really feel like a knee. It just feels like its own independent joint that I can control in its way that works. And it's really remarkable how brains are able to do that, I think.
That is remarkable. And one of the other things I would imagine is that you get the benefit of the bottom of your foot, what was your foot, as the bottom of your stump. So then you get that skin that is really tough on the bottom of your foot. That a lot of amputees have the issue of just that their skin is just so susceptible to breakdown.
That's
so you're in a better position.
That's a really, really good point that a lot of people don't recognize either, is that, the bottom of your foot is obviously prepared for weight bearing. It gets calluses. You can walk outside on the gravel and, your foot's not going to be too bad. And so that's the same principles applied to rotationplasty, is that, I don't get as tore up as other amputees do. It still happens for sure. Prosthetics are still not super good at accommodating skin, but it's so much better, especially because most of my weight is actually held kind of on the heel, where it can just take an absolute beating. So it's definitely interesting. The doctors who did that are absolutely brilliant. I can't believe some guy really came up with that and gave it a shot, but it works wonders.
I mean, it makes sense now, but when somebody's floating that idea, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to cut out the tumor. We're going to cut out the knee, take the midsection of the leg, and then reverse the bottom section and reattach it. And, how did the audience go there, where people go, what are you going to do? You're going to lose your medical license like right now, really.
You got to have kind of a morbid mind just to put that thought together. I'm sure, after the first success came out, he was deemed a genius, but definitely pretty brave to just come out and suggest that.
Well, which is interesting too, because we've talked about you high jumping, which is spectacular. That you can almost get over most ordinary doors. that you've had this operation, and it all sounds like it makes sense right now. But when you were a 12-year-old kid, how did all this make sense, or what? How do you digest that as a 12-year-old kid?
Yeah, that's the question, right? It was obviously such an incredibly challenging time for me and my family to be diagnosed with cancer, to be taken out of school, taken out of sports, was just so challenging, along with just all the unanswered questions.
And you were a star athlete too, right? I'm best kid on your football team.
That's the thing, is sports were my life leading up to the diagnosis. I was a year-round athlete, taller, stronger, faster than pretty much everyone in my grade. And so it felt like all of that was taken from me. And, when I was 3 months into chemotherapy was when the orthopedic surgeon kind of sat me down and talked about the options that I could pursue for handling the tumor that was in my leg. And he laid out 3 distinct options. The first was a straight above knee amputation, cut pretty far above the knee to make sure, there were adequate margins. I'd have to use a prosthetic and my stump would be pretty small. The second option was what he called limb salvage, which was where they would meticulously pick apart the tumor and any damaged bone, replace it with an artificial joint, and I'd still have my whole leg. I would, cosmetically look the same as I did before, just a few scars. And the third option was rotationplasty, like we just talked about. And it took me no time at all to decide, limb salvage was a no-brainer. Why would I opt in to have my leg cut off? But as we went with that decision and talked to the surgeon more, it became clear that this artificial joint that they'd use would be extremely fragile, that a return to sports would be pretty much impossible unless it was things like golf, maybe. And even things like biking or going in the ocean could potentially be too much for that joint to handle, just because a wave could hit my knee just wrong and shatter that joint. And I was not ready to accept that at all. That was not the lifestyle that I had lived before. That was not a lifestyle that I was ready to accept. And, one of the memories that I speak of most often is the moment that I really decided I wanted to go through with rotationplasty was when I was kind of considering growing up, how my dad would take me out to the backyard most nights of the week and we'd throw a football around, throw baseball, go for runs, whatever it may be. And I got to thinking, down the line, I wanted to be able to do that with my own kids, and going through with limb salvage would render that impossible. So that made the decision pretty easy for me. I wanted to go through with, having my leg amputated for the sake of returning to the lifestyle that I wanted to live. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that would include, competing internationally as a Paralympic athlete. It was more or less just, I wanted to bike again. I wanted to be able to, throw a football outside and not worry about it. But it definitely has come a long way, and I'm extremely proud of the decision that I made. I wouldn't change a thing at all. It definitely has given me the lifestyle that I wanted.
So it sounds like you were really involved as a 12-year-old kid, and you could understand what was going on. And I mean, the limb salvage, it makes perfect sense, right? This is it. It's like, no, I want to be as much me as I possibly can.
Totally.
And then he gave you the function side of it of like, well, this looks like you're you, but this allows you the rotationplasty or whatever makes you more functional. Did you have enough knowledge of prosthetics, of people with prosthetics, to be able to kind of comprehend that? I mean, Paralympics really, so this was 2012. So London, in a lot of ways, was the television breakthrough for the Paralympics. It's much bigger now, but you might not have seen anything with the Paralympics prior to getting your leg amputated.
Yeah, no. In hindsight, I don't know if I was adequately informed of what I was doing. But you kind of hit on it. It was extremely important to me at that time, even at 12 years old, to have agency in the decision-making process that was going on with my treatment and with the surgery that I was going to do and how I was being taken care of at home. And I'm really, really so fortunate to have had healthcare providers who gave me the opportunity to speak out and to make decisions, on my own behalf. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I didn't know anyone that used a prosthetic. All I knew was doctor said it'd be possible, and I think it would be possible for me. So let's go through with it. And, I remember, so that was done in the spring, and I remember laying in my hospital bed, getting chemotherapy and watching as much of the Paralympic Games of 2012 as I could, and being, inspired. I was, really excited to see what was possible with a prosthetic, but none of that seemed remotely possible for me. I was 60 pounds down. I was this emaciated kid going through chemo, wasn't eating. How could I even imagine going out and doing that myself when I didn't even know how to walk? And so, it was definitely cool to see what others were doing, but that dream didn't seem like a reality. It didn't seem like a possibility, I guess, for quite some time.
It's funny. How did your parents look at it? Because I asked my parents. I was doing a little project, and I asked them, did you think that I'd ski again? And they both said, no, we didn't think you'd ski again. And it's like, did you have more optimism than your parents? Were they right on board with you? How did that work?
My parents and my whole family, and really my entire small town of Middlebury, Indiana, from the day that I was diagnosed with cancer to the day I won my first world championship, they were in my corner. They were behind me the whole way. They really, I think, kind of reignited that flame in me to get out there and to continue pursuing my goals of returning to sports. There was always the doubt in my mind and in a lot of people's minds of just, how feasible that would be, what the extent of that would be. And I mean, what would have been less than a year after finishing chemo, I tried out for my high school basketball team and made that team. And I think after that, it was everything was going. I wasn't going to stop. And so after basketball season, joined the lacrosse team and then joined the football team. And just like that, I was back out on the field. I was back out on the court with my friends. I returned to sports. And, as I expected, as my family expected, I was not the athlete that I was before. I was still figuring it all out. But the most important thing to me was that I had made that return. And I think that was the most, I think returning to sports like that was what got me to the point where I felt so much more independent athletically. Like I felt like I could really pursue new things. And that's kind of when adaptive sports fell into my lap, just kind of discovered it out of the blue and said, shoot, let's give it a shot.
Because you were not a high jumper beforehand.
No, never tried high jump, never did track and field until my first adaptive sports competition, which was part of GLASA organization, Great Lakes Adaptive Sports Association. They were having a track meet for adaptive athletes. My dad said I should give it a shot. And so I did all 8 events that were offered for me, the 100, 200, 400, discus, javelin, shot put, high jump, long jump, because I didn't know what I was going to do. And I think high jump was the very last event. Didn't necessarily like it any more than a couple of the other events, but I remember Kathy Sellers, the former head coach of the Paralympic track and field team, she was there. She kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I think you have some really good potential in this," and that was enough for me. So I just started working at that a little bit in my free time, and within the next 9 months, was in Doha, Qatar for World Championships.
Which is absolutely amazing, because high jump, more so than the other ones, right? The other ones are pretty straightforward, in terms of like 100, 200. Okay, this is it. Start, run to the finish line. That's not that hard. Long jump, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different, hit the board and jump, but high jump, there are so many technical elements that go into it, and shot and disc and javelin certainly as well. But it seems like one that you don't necessarily just run into, that you don't just say, oh yeah, I recognize that I had an affinity for high jump. And it's like, how did you recognize that you had an affinity? It takes a while to actually even figure out where you're supposed to be in order to try to go over the bar.
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't realize when I first tried high jump, was just the sheer technicality of it all. Just that, how many different origins of rotations there are, and different physics that go into building pressure on the curve and taking off vertical instead of into the bar, and the parabola that we track on our videos. I had no idea what any of that was. I just kind of was drawn to high jump because when you jump in high jump, you jump off one leg, and that's exactly what I had, was one leg. And so I thought, hey, that'd be cool. And I always was, athletic, like we talked about. And so jumping was something that I was comfortable with. And then the technical side of it came with coaching after that, as far as, figuring out how to run an approach, figuring out how to arch your back in the right timing, tuck your chin, and pull your legs up at the right time. That all came with coaching. I didn't know any of that. It was more or less, for me at the beginning, just run and jump as high as I could. And that was fun. It was fun for me. I kind of wished I still had the ability to just run and jump instead of overthinking every single step that I take, but I can't go back.
Did you have any heroes, any high jump heroes? I mean, I say that for myself. I remember meeting Dick Fosbury and just kind of being like, whoa, like, you're so cool. You totally changed this sport. And remember, Dwight Stone with his Mickey Mouse t-shirt and stuff like that. But did you have any high jump heroes?
By the time, like 2015, when I was at my first World Championships, high jump was still so new to me, and it wasn't even something that I was taking that seriously yet. So I didn't really have heroes. I've always looked up to my coach, Kyle Mitchler. He's only 5 or 6 years older than me, and so he's real close in age, and he was a high jumper. But as far as like Paralympic high jumpers, Jeff Skiba was ahead of me. He was a different classification, but used a prosthetic and was just incredible at it. Roderick Townsend, he's a different classification again, but he, those two really, I think, just showed me so much at the beginning of my career. And especially now, we're at competitions like at trials. Roderick is still giving me advice as I'm jumping, because he is just such a pro at it. And I've always looked up to, Mataz Barshim from Doha, from Qatar, who just shared the gold medal with Tamberi, just because he makes high jump look so beautiful. And that's always something that I want to do with mine, is to make it look that easy, to make it look that graceful. Other guys, they run to the bar and they muscle with everything they have to jump and get up there and throw it all back, and it gets over the bar, but it doesn't look as graceful as a guy like Barshim does. And so there's kind of a combination of different high jump heroes. But yeah, I mean, it took some time for me to realize, what I was doing and who I could look up to, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, like, sort of like the parabola that you're talking about, that you're going over the bar, and also thinking about the height of it. I mean, like, it's going over this bar, but if you had the ability to palm a basketball with your foot, you could probably like dunk, with your foot as you're going over the bar, kind of thing. Like, there's so much time. There's time in the air, which allows that to be beautiful. And it sounds like that beauty part of it the aesthetic is something that actually that's important to you, not just the results.
Yeah, I think so. It's not something that I really actively think about because, when I'm training, I'm thinking about the minute little details, what I'm doing at a certain time. But when I do watch video after a big competition where I'm jumping higher than I was in practice and I see how it all comes together and how I'm just exploding off the ground, it is so exciting to me to just see the comparison between the pros that I've looked up to forever, and my jump, because I think I didn't used to have that at all, and it's really starting to come together. And I think it is such an elegant event that I think a lot of other events lack. Sorry, that if I can put that together, it's definitely worth it for me. But yeah, it's not something I think about during a jump.
But it's a confirmation that you're jumping like a pro. That you look up to these guys and you're like, okay, like I've been doing this for a while. I look like a pro. Like that's pretty legit, isn't it?
Totally. I don't want to compare myself to a professional high jumper, but now that I've been doing it 7 years and my eyes are much more trained to see things. It is cool to see, when I finally have the angle at takeoff with my foot out in front of me, to see that come to action, at takeoff, for example, and know that I've been watching videos of these pro high jumpers do that, trying to mimic it myself. Yeah, I mean, it really is definitely a confirmation that of just how far I've come. As far as just like, I guess it's just proves the hard work that I've done, because it's so hard to see that in a high jump sometimes. It is the most frustrating thing I've ever done, for sure. And so the good days are definitely you definitely got to take advantage of the good days and see those good things, to keep going, I guess.
The mentorship thing is important to you. You've been on the receiving end with guys like Jeff Skiba, with Roderick Townsend, but you also are paying it forward too, like with Ezra Freck, who's under your wing, he's a sophomore, just finished sophomore in high school.
Yeah, Ezra and I go way back. And him and I remember, we each remember this so vividly. It was trials for Rio 2016, 5 years ago. He was there. It was either trials for Rio or for London. Either way, him and his dad were at this competition watching. We were talking for a while, before and after. And he told me straight up, he said, I want to be jumping beside you in Tokyo 2020. And at this point, he was so small. He had just picked up high jump, but I could tell, I knew, I was like, if you put together a plan and you do everything you can to make that happen, I am so confident that you will be beside me in Tokyo, because I've seen that side of it. I know how competitive Ezra is. I know all the work that goes into, just being him. And so I was extremely confident in what I said. And I think that kind of fueled him quite a bit, knowing that I believed in him, that I was in his shoes not long ago, as well at that point. And so to be in this position where, he's like a little brother to me, and he's also now someone I have to compete against in Tokyo. We were in Peru together for Pan Ams in 2019, and we shared we were on the podium together. And he was in Dubai jumping with me as well. And it's just so cool to see that all come, full circle, because I see so much of myself in him. And I'm just so proud of how far he has come. And I know come, next, Tokyo or next year, especially Paris, it is going to be, lights out for Ezra. He is going to be top of the flight. He is going to be jumping higher than anybody else. And that's when I know it's time to hang it up. But until then, I got to keep going, I think.
Well, he's only 16, right? So if you're talking about the Rio trials, that would have made him 11.
Yeah. And there's a picture of us at that competition where both of us look like toddlers compared to what we look like now. It's incredible to see just how young he was when that dream popped into his head, especially now that he's manifesting it. It came to fruition. It kind of puts it into perspective, just the age that he decided that's what he wanted to do. He's a beast.
Well, it's an interesting because I mean, you're talking about being the mentor, getting mentored, being a mentor, but he's also been in that position, like with Angel City Sports. We're creating a movement that is helping so many people as well and empowering them. I mean, a lot of us have. It's kind of like you've been an individual and you've had to make your way until you kind of find your group, but he's helping to help. He and Clayton as well are helping to create that group so that people have a community too where they can continue to learn.
Very, very much so. The Freck family, Ezra, me, so many other athletes are equally as passionate about, their competition as they are advancing the Paralympic movement, about, raising awareness for adaptive sports, providing opportunity for people with disabilities to engage in, fitness and sporting opportunities, as well as just kind of sharing the stories that so many adaptive athletes have to share. I think that's something that so many of us are passionate about, including you, with this podcast. It's a matter of just growing the Paralympic movement. And so part of that is, being a mentor to those around you. I kind of lacked that for a few years following the amputation of my leg. And I felt so isolated in the world that I was living in because no one knew what I was going through. No one knew the challenges that I was facing. No one knew what it was like to be an athlete using a prosthetic leg. Well, as soon as I discovered adaptive sports, I realized there's a whole community of people like this who are so prepared to share their advice, to share their hardships. And so there's so much solidarity in that I think, Ezra certainly understands just how important it is to give back whenever you have the opportunity like that.
Well, you said you were alone for a fair amount of time, and going through that process, like in the hospital, it sounds like that's part of what pushed you toward becoming a doctor. How did that? I mean, you were 12 years old, right? So when did this thought spark?
Yeah. So I mean, I spent all of seventh and eighth grade year pretty much in the hospital going through chemotherapy. And so during that time, I obviously got to experience what it's like to be a patient, what it means to be a patient, how vulnerable it is to be in that position, as well as just got to sort of see so many of the intangibles that go into making a good doctor. I had an incredible health team that took care of me. And, when I left the hospital for the last time, I kind of felt like I had this book of lessons that I had learned that I wanted to give back somehow. Well, at that point, a career in medicine felt impossible. I went into high school pretty much with a sixth grade education because I had missed seventh and eighth grade year. So going to college felt almost out of the question for a while. I was more concerned with just catching up with my peers, academically, learning to walk, and then hopefully, graduating high school in any sort of shape. Well, fast forward a few years, it became more feasible for me to go to college and ended up, graduating top 10 in my class and going to Notre Dame through so much hard work. And then at that point I decided, what the hell, I've overcome so much already. Let's aim big. Let's try to go to medical school. And I'm here now finishing my first week of medical school. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. So much of my experiences have drawn me to this career where I'm able to give back in the way that, I think it's very challenging to learn a lot of the things that I've learned. Like you can't learn it in a textbook. You can't learn how to, show empathy in a textbook. You can't figure out the bedside manner, and just, I don't know, just so much of what goes into being a doctor. You just can't learn that in a textbook. And I learned that the hard way. I don't encourage any of my, fellow classmates in medical school to go have their leg cut off or go get a tumor. But it is a very valuable lesson, some very valuable lessons that I've learned, and I'm really excited to be able to give back, I guess.
Well, because the possibilities as well, right? And that works for some people. Other people like, look, you know what? I'm not jumping over any bar anywhere. I have no desire whatsoever to do that. But even if that's the case, you can speak to quality of life.
Totally. I feel like I was given a second chance. I saw just how quickly everything can be taken from you. I was diagnosed on Christmas Eve of 2011. And my life just came to an absolute stop, not just for the next week, but for the next 2 years. And I felt like I was kind of just dumped out into the real world with no idea where I was going to go. But I knew that I was given a second chance on life. I knew that, getting out of cancer treatment was not a guarantee at any point in time. A 65% survival rate, I think, of the cancer that I had. That's not a whole lot better than a coin flip. And so, and I knew that at the time, and especially now, I know how fortunate I am to just be alive, let alone in the position that I'm in. And so, yeah, I mean, I set ambitious goals. I try to set myself up to succeed as much as I can, just because I know it could all be taken so fast.
Well, I mean, our osteosarcoma, right? A rare bone disease. And when they put rare or rare bone cancer, when they put rare in front of it, that's a bad thing, because it means that there's no research going into a rare bone cancer. So you're left on your own and left with treatment that effectively is kind of like, yes, we think this might work, but it might not work because we haven't really seen it, and we haven't seen it in a 12-year-old, and we don't have all the data to back it up. When did so you grew up in Middlebury, Indiana, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that is relatively close to Notre Dame. When did the Notre Dame football team effectively adopt you? How did that end up working out?
Yeah, it's really so funny to think about how that all happened. So I was in the hospital getting cancer treatment in 2012. This is before my surgery to have my leg amputated. There was an assistant coach for the Notre Dame football team who liked to volunteer in the pediatric oncology unit, kind of interacting with the kids, just, trying to lift their spirits. Really great guy. And he came into my room, and immediately we kind of hit it off, just because we both shared the passion for sports, especially football. And just kind of, I think, our personalities meshed real well. And so he started coming back, and he kind of hashed this idea at the time to sort of provide a two-way street of motivation, in which I would be adopted into the team. I would be, their teammate, their brother. And as I would undergo my 21 sessions of chemotherapy, they would be beside me every step of the way. They'd be pushing me to, continue fighting, to go through with all the physical therapy, and to, do everything that I can to get back out in the field. And in reversal, I would provide them the motivation and the inspiration to continue, doing what they have to do to be the best team in the country. And that's exactly what it was. They were my brothers. I was on the field, in the locker for every home game that year. Notre Dame went to the national championship that year, and they flew out the whole family to Miami to be there, because I think a lot of the guys really, what they told me is they felt like I was kind of the lucky charm. That was just such a special year for me, and such a special year for them. And that really provided such a powerful first step in getting back into sports, was to be in that environment where I felt like I was part of the team. Like, I felt like I was contributing to the wins that were getting, happening out in the field. And so that was just critical in getting me back into sports. And I'm still so close with several of the guys today. I'm extremely fortunate to have had that brotherhood that I did during the challenging times that I was going through. No doubt. And I think now to have graduated from Notre Dame, to train every day in the same building that I was adopted into the team, it was just such a wild experience to just see how far I've come, because everything that I was doing just seemed like it'd be so impossible based on how things were back then.
Which happens as a result of a chance encounter, effectively.
Yeah.
I mean, and granted, you're bringing a lot to the table as well. It's not like, but it's just, I mean, this is the idea of luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? Like you were this kid who could be helpful to the team, and they were good too, right? This was, I mean, national championship game, but undefeated in the regular season.
Yeah.
I mean, this has got to be amazing. It's got to be such a cool ride.
That's exactly what,
12-year-old, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what it was. And more than anything, it provided an opportunity to take my mind off of the things that I was going through. There were probably half the games I was out in the field or in our seats with a 10-pound IV bag strapped to my back and a backpack pumping through my system, having to pee 3 times a quarter because I was getting pumped with fluid so fast. But I didn't think about it. I didn't care, because my heart was out there on the field. It was definitely challenging to find distractions during that time, because the stuff that I was going through was just it was heavy stuff, but that was definitely enough to take my mind off of it, and was so therapeutic in that way.
You said it went both ways too, as far as the motivation was concerned, but just painting that picture, right? So the picture is these gigantic man boys, whatever. I mean, they're in college, they're effectively men, I guess, at that point, but I mean, there's still a lot of them are still really young, but like gigantic people. They're playing on Saturday. I mean, when you go to Michigan, you're playing over 100,000 people in the stands. You're on national television. Like, you couldn't help but be a fan of these guys. And then some of them are going to go from playing on Saturdays to then playing on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, these are my buds, but at the same time, these are guys that you're looking up to. But then how did it work with them? Where, like, I mean, I'd imagine you're my hero, but then what did they say to you?
Well, so that's kind of what something that made the dynamic, I think, especially funny, was that I grew up hating Notre Dame. I was raised a Purdue fan, and everyone was Notre Dame fans, and I thought they were the most annoying people ever. It's just such a ridiculous fan base. So I was adopted onto the team, and so that first year, I didn't necessarily have that fanboy type interaction where I was just so blown away by them, because I met them as guys first and foremost in the spring, and then I got to see them play football. And especially at the time, of course, I looked up to them so much. They seemed like they had everything figured out, like they were just these brilliant, man giants. Fast forward a few years, when I'm in college at Notre Dame, I was friends with a lot of guys on the football team, and I realized, no, that is just not the case. These guys are idiots, just like I am. They just want to have fun. It really is funny to kind of make the comparison with the guys that I was friends with to the guys that I was friends with, back in 2012. But yeah, I mean, you asked about kind of the flip side. It was, I think the biggest thing that pushed the guys on the football team was that they saw themselves in me. They saw my football highlights. They saw my basketball and baseball highlights. They saw a kid who had a pretty promising future in sports have it all taken away. And they, I think, kind of were able to put it into perspective, just, how lucky they are to have gone as far as they had without, something preventing them from pursuing their careers in football. And so, yeah, it was definitely such an interesting dynamic that really worked so well to motivate everyone involved. And at the end of the day, I mean, it was a very organic way of pushing each other. It wasn't them saying like, keep going, you're so strong, you're so inspirational. It was more or less just them asking me how my day was, hanging out, playing video games, letting me hang out in the locker room. And in that way, I guess, really pushing me to, I guess it was kind of one of the only organic interactions that I had at that time, just because so much of what I was going through was either medical or, people in my community telling me how inspirational or praying for me and stuff like that. So it was just so special.
And people not even knowing how to approach you, like, oh, there's this 12-year-old kid, his life has been taken away from him. And what do I say? The whole kid glove thing. And they're like, hey man, come on, let's play some video games. And you're like, yeah, cool.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted. And that's what I needed, was a step away from being that kid with cancer and just being a friend. So that was huge.
It's one of the things I've seen just in sport. Like I've seen it with skiers. Like I grew up a ski racer, and just seeing some of these guys who, are Olympic medalists and stuff like that. And they're like, no, what you do is really cool. What you do, and I think there's a sense of, you see your mortality kind of in, like that could be me. And I hope I would do that or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting sort of from the flip side to see these guys who seemingly have everything going for them going, no, what you're doing, that's cool. And you're like, really? But what you're doing is way cooler than what I'm doing.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting how everything gets put into perspective. It kind of humanizes everything. Even your heroes can be humanized quite a bit. They're people too.
It is, and it humanizes that journey, right? I mean, that journey in sports is such a it's such a microcosm of everything that we do, right? Where it's like, yeah, you're going to get beaten up. You're going to fail. You're going to fail, and you've got to figure out how to move forward from that and find a way to succeed. they've talked about your mental toughness as one of your greatest attributes. Have you always been mentally tough? Because it's easy to look at it and go, oh, he's mentally tough as a result of 200 days in the hospital, of going through chemotherapy. Like, he had to become tough. But were you always tough?
You know, I don't think I think I was always mentally tough, but I didn't ever use it until I had no choice. When I was diagnosed with cancer, before that, I was a mature kid, I was a smart kid or whatever, but I was spoiled. I cried when I struck out. I gave up easily. And it wasn't until everything was taken away from me that I had no choice but to be mentally strong. And I think it was all inside of me the whole time. But I mean, like I said, I had no choice. And it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that, sulking and feeling bad for myself was totally appropriate at the time. No one blamed me for feeling sorry for myself, but it got me nowhere. It got me, no steps closer to pursuing my dreams. It didn't teach me how to walk. It didn't get me any closer to being cancer free. And so I decided, enough with that. Let's try to take as much of my life back into my hands as possible. Let's get some agency here, and let's control the things that I can control. And I think that's what my mental strength kind of manifests itself as, is controlling the things that I can control. A cancer diagnosis, that's out of my control, but what I do with that was in my hands. And I think that's what's allowed me to be in the position that I'm in today, working hard to I guess achieve the things that I want to achieve, setting myself up to succeed. And you kind of hit on it earlier. It's like, yeah, the harder I work, the luckier I get. I learned that pretty quickly when I was going through cancer treatment, that hard work goes a long way, especially when you set yourself up to succeed. So yeah, I mean, the mental strength's always been there. It's just sometimes you have no choice, and I haven't really gone back, I don't think.
Well, the trauma can demonstrate to you just how strong you can be. And you might think that you're that strong, but you haven't had to prove it. But that's survival. Can you take that sense of survival and continue to apply it now to your you're in a sense of survival right now too. Like, surviving med school seems like a really good thing to do. But is that part of, or do you find yourself, do you beat yourself up when you're like, I'm feeling sorry for myself. I should be as tough as I was when I was 12.
I mean, so you hit on it. Like, the lessons that I learned when I was going through cancer treatment have impacted every facet of my life and have continued to, I guess, guide me in everything that I do. There is always that perspective in the back of my mind that things could be worse. You have overcome so much worse than taking a quiz in medical school. You chose to have your leg cut off in the midst of 21 sessions of chemotherapy. You can go take this quiz, Sam. Not to say that I don't recognize that things can be challenging sometimes. I like to check in on myself and recalibrate and recognize that, yeah, I've been through worse, but this is still pretty hard. But there is always, I think, that perspective that I guess the way that perspective, I guess, manifests itself is me not being afraid to do things that I would have previously been afraid to do. Me going to medical school would have petrified me. I think, the kid who hadn't gone through cancer, but it doesn't scare me like it would have, because I know that I'm able to adapt. I've adapted to so much. I've overcome so much more. This is just one step on the journey. And so, yeah, I mean, there is that the mortality perspective is so important to me, I think.
And has that become instinct then? I mean, it's like, I'm going to med school, I know I can do this. Or do you have to sort of sit yourself down occasionally and go, look, Sam, you went through all this stuff. You can handle this. Yes, it's going to be hard, or is it instinct? How does that work?
I think a portion of it is instinct. It rarely ever actually comes out with me thinking about all the things that I've overcome. I think more so what it comes out as is me trusting the process. One of my favorite quotes that I think applies to my life so well is that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And, going through cancer treatment, having my leg amputated, none of it made sense at the time. Returning to sports, trying out adaptive sports didn't really make sense at the time. But now, 7 years later, I can look back and see how every single one of those steps along the way was so important in getting me to where I am today, whether that's, academically or athletically. And so, when I face challenges today, I think I'm much more prepared to think about, or to recognize the fact that the challenges might not make sense right now. It might seem worthless, but a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, it'll make so much sense. It'll be so crucial in, forming the person that I will become. And so it's a lot easier for me to just kind of power through in that way, knowing that, the process will make sense.
Sam, this is awesome. We've taken a full hour plus of I don't know how much reading you can get done in an hour and 15 minutes. And I'm sure you've got a bit of reading. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to watching you in Tokyo.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. Time really flew by. I didn't realize an hour had passed already.
No, this was absolutely awesome. And I feel like I've learned so much just from talking to you. So thanks a ton. Good luck in med school. That just sounds like a tough road, but you're choosing tough roads, right?
Exactly. It'll all make sense.
It will all make sense when you look back in 20 years. I think it'll probably make sense sooner than that as well. So good luck. Thanks a ton. To all of you out there, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my talk with Sam. If you didn't, I think that might be a problem. This was a great talk, so thanks again. The greatest thing you can do for us is please tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in. We've got some great guests. It's really been a fun time. I learned something every single time I talk to one of these athletes. So please tell your friends. This will be a podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. Follow us, like us. Please continue to spread the message, and we'll continue to have great guests. Sam, thanks again. Have a great go in Tokyo.
Awesome. Thank you.